a folksy friend, and on this channel I like to talk about stories, in particular folk tales, beliefs, and mythologies. On Tuesdays we talk Tolkien, and today is Tuesday, so let's go. After the death of their king Finwë at the hands of the greatest evil the world has ever known, now known as Morgoth, the black foe of the world, the king's eldest son has taken control. Feanor whipped the Noldor into a frenzy, convincing the vast majority to gather their belongings and follow him out of their city and on a long journey to Middle-earth. They planned to not only take vengeance on Morgoth for the death of the king and the theft of the great Silmarils, but also to take control and to rule the lands of Middle-earth. Despite a warning from the Valar, they had still continued on their way. Feanor led the Noldor north, knowing that that was the way that Morgoth had traveled. He started to think as they walked about how they were going to get across the sea. The only landmass that connected Aman to Middle-earth was the Helcaraxe in the furthest north, the grinding ice, and it was a very dangerous, pretty much lethal path. Only Morgoth and Ungoliant had ever crossed it. The best way to get over would be to sail, but the Noldor had no ships, nor the knowledge to make them, even if there was time to do so. So Feanor set his mind to the Teleri, knowing that they had a great bay full of their swan ships, and he led his people to Alqualondë. Feanor told the Teleri what had happened, what had befallen them, and tried to inspire, manipulate them in the same way that he had the Noldor. It didn't work. The Teleri said no. They told him they would be sad to lose their friends, the Noldor, but they would not go against the Valar or give up their beloved ships. They were content, happy to live in Alqualondë with Olwe as their ruler, and they had faith that Ulmo and the rest of the Valar would eventually find Morgoth and put things right. Then Feanor became angry. He declared that Olwe was renouncing their friendship and brought up the past when the Teleri had first arrived in Valinor. The Noldor had taken them in, given them not only help but treasures, and helped them build the very city they were standing in. He said the Teleri had been nothing but empty-handed loiterers, and without the help of the Noldor, they would still be living in huts on the beach. Olwe was calm. He told Feanor that he was not renouncing their friendship, that he was actually trying to help. He said that the Teleri and the Noldor were meant to remain in Valinor as friends in their neighboring cities forever. But, he said, when it came to their ships, that was something the Noldor had no part in. Osei himself had taught the Teleri how to build the ships, and the Teleri had toiled over them, crafted the wood. Their wives and daughters had woven the sails. They were a labor of great love and dedication, the same way that the gems were for the Noldor. Nothing Feanor said or offered could change his mind. So Feanor went back to his people, made sure he had enough of them, and went to the harbor to just take the ships. But the Teleri withstood him and cast many of the Noldor into the sea. Then swords were drawn, and a bitter fight was fought upon the ships, and about the lampet quays and piers of the haven, and even upon the great arch of its gate. The Teleri drove the Noldor back 3 times, but then Fingolfin's group arrived. Seeing their people in an active battle, Fingon and many of the others rushed in to help the Noldor, not even thinking to stop and figure out how this had started. It was a bloody fight, and the Teleri were outmatched. Finally, the Teleri lost the battle. We know from the histories of Middle-earth that Galadriel had been there during the kinslaying, that she had come from the back and had actually fought in defense of the Teleri, as they were her mother's people. But the result was still the same. Feanor's people, who had been closest to the ships, boarded and sailed them out of the harbor. They followed along the coastline, kind of keeping pace with the Noldor who were still walking on land. Olwe called for Osei's help, but the Valar refused to let him interfere. That's when Uinen began to weep at the loss of her beloved mariners, and the sea itself rose up in anger and started a great storm against the ships. Many ships were destroyed, and those aboard drowned, but the majority did get through. So the Noldor continued the march north until they eventually reached the frozen wastelands of Ahriman. And there, on a high rock, they saw a dark figure, and it spoke to them in a booming voice. The Noldor all stopped, compelled to listen. This figure, who seemed to look more like Mondos than the Herald of Manwë, delivered a message from the Valar. This was called the Prophecy of the North, or more commonly known by the Doom of the Noldor. This is what he told them. The Valar will close Valinor to them, so that even when the Noldor shed unnumbered tears, not even the sound of their cries will be heard. The house of Feanor had earned the wrath of the Valar, and it will follow them across the world, spreading to whoever chose to follow them. The oath of Feanor would drive and betray them, and the jewels they sought would be kept forever away. Whatever his house did would end in evil, even if they didn't mean it to begin that way, all because anything they start will end in treason or threat of treason among their own family. The house of Feanor will forever be deprived of lands and belonging. They had spilled the blood of their kindred and stained Aman. For this reason, they will forever be under the shadow of death. By the way the elves were created, they could not become sick, but they could be killed, and they would be killed. By weapons, by torment, and by grief. Then their souls will come to the halls of Mondos, but there they will find no pity. Any of them that did not die in Middle-earth shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane and become shadows of regret before the mortal man that will come after. The Valar have spoken. The Noldor cowered at this terrifying fate, but Feanor was not dissuaded. He told this dark figure that he had not taken the oath lightly, and he fully intended to keep it. That his people faced many threats, those from the Valar just one of them, but they would not suffer cowardice, and they would not turn back. He announced that the deeds of his people would be so great that songs of those deeds would be sung forever within the lands of Middle-earth, until the last days of the world. Despite this rousing speech, the prophecy of the North was the last straw for Finarfin. His wife was the daughter of Olwe, and he had just witnessed his people slaughter many of hers. He was full of regret and anger at Feanor, so he and many of his people turned back. They returned all the way to the Ring of Doom, where they were forgiven by the Valar, and Finarfin became the king of the Noldor who stayed in Tirion. This, however, did not include his children, who chose to stay and continue on the road to Middle-earth. The vast majority of the Noldor followed, either out of loyalty to Feanor, Fingolfin, or because they were afraid that they had taken some part in the kinslaying and that they would face the wrath of the Valar. So they forged on, and the evil that was foretold in the prophecy of the North began. The Noldor made it all the way to the furthest part of Aman and saw the start of the icy waters of the Helcaraxe. That's where Feanor stopped and discussed how to continue. The Helcaraxe was extremely dangerous, but they no longer had enough ships to bring everyone across at once. And now the Noldor were beginning to mistrust one another. No one wanted to stay back in Aman and wait for their turn on a ship. The cold started to affect them pretty quickly, and it wasn't long before those who were loyal to Fingolfin began to curse Feanor, blaming him for all that had happened. And Feanor heard these unhappy murmurs. So he met with his sons to figure out what to do. Similarly to the attitude from Alqualande, they decided to simply get on the ships and make a run for it. It was pretty easy because Feanor's people already were the ones sailing the ships along the coast. So he, his sons, and those he deemed loyal to himself managed to sneak away from the main part of the Noldor and board the ships. Because they were already so far north, the sea was at its narrowest point, and they were able to sail east without any problems. They made landfall in the Firth of Drengist at a spot called Loskar. There, they disembarked and Maedhros, the eldest, went to his father. He asked which of the men would be sent back with the ships to collect everyone else and ferry them over. He had once been very close friends with Fingon, Fingolfin's eldest son, so he asked that Fingon be on one of the first ships. Feanor had other ideas. He laughed at his son's request, telling Maedhros that those left behind were nothing but baggage on the road, and that he had brought everyone that mattered. He said they could continue to curse his name and cry and whine all the way back to the Valar. Then he ordered the ships to be burned. Maedhros stepped aside, but Feanor lit the fires anyway. The greatest ships the world had ever known went up in great flames, so bright it reflected off the clouds and could be seen across the sea. This was the first act of treason, family against family, as told in the Doom of the Noldor. Fingolfin saw the reflection, the light of the fires, and he knew what Feanor had done. Bitterness filled him, and he became even more determined to get to Middle-earth so he could face Feanor. He led the people further north to their only remaining option. It was only because of their might as young, relatively young, elves fresh from the blessed realm of Aman that they were able to survive the crossing. They were led by Fingolfin and his sons, as well as Finrod and Galadriel. They suffered the cruel hills of ice, and even though their valor and endurance grew with hardship, few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed that desperate crossing in hardihood or woe. Many died, including Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, mother to Idril. Finally, after great suffering with a group smaller than they'd entered with, Fingolfin's people made it out of the ice. There was very little love left for Feanor in this group of survivors. They made it at last into Middle-earth, blowing their trumpets in celebration, and overhead they saw the very first moonrise. Join me next week when I will be talking about just how that moonrise came to be. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider leaving me a like. Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe maybe. And I'll see you next week.